On the 28th floor of a towering glass skyscraper in the heart of Atlanta, there is a woman most employees pass by as if she were air. Her name is Martha, 58 years old, widowed with a cat named Pickles and hands that move as swiftly as if playing a classical piece with an old mop. Martha doesn't belong to the world of pressed suits, overpriced coffee, and endless email threads. She belongs to the early mornings when the office is still dark and the hum of the vacuum is the only lullaby in the air. She hums old tunes while cleaning, songs her husband used to play on their antique radio back when he was alive. Quiet and unassuming, she simply does her work, carefully, kindly, and without fanfare. There's something few people know. Martha isn't just a janitor. Over 20 years ago, she co-founded a small software company. But after financial hardship and personal loss, she stepped away, giving up her share. No one in that building knows this, and she doesn't need them to. She's learned one thing: humility is the richest thing a person can possess. But that morning, something felt a little different. A group of new interns was being shown around the office. Leading the tour was the CEO, a young, brilliant man whose eyes scanned people the way one might assess a portfolio. As they passed Martha, who was mopping the hallway near the glass windows, he paused for a moment. Then, with a half-joke, half-sneer, he said, "This is Miss Martha, the queen of the mop. Hopefully none of you spent 4 years studying IT just to end up doing this." Awkward laughter bubbled up from the group of interns. Martha stood upright, looked him in the eye, but said nothing. She simply gave a polite nod and went back to mopping, as if she hadn't heard a thing. But someone did notice. A young intern standing at the very back. Her name was Lila, 22 years old, the first in her family to attend college, and someone who grew up in a rented apartment where her mother worked as a cleaner. And from that small moment, that single instant, the real story began. Lila couldn't forget that moment, even though everyone else seemed to let it pass like a clumsy early morning joke. All throughout orientation, her mind kept drifting back to the look in Martha's eyes. Not angry, not sad, just quiet, like someone who had grown used to being overlooked. And maybe she had. After the tour ended, while the others rushed downstairs for coffee, Lila lingered in the hallway. Martha was kneeling, cleaning up a coffee spill someone had left behind without a word. Lila didn't need to ask. She knew it wasn't the first time. "Can I help you with that?" Lila said, her voice so soft it surprised even herself. Martha looked up. There was a flicker of surprise, then a gentle smile. "Thank you, sweetheart. But I've got it. This floor, it's got a rhythm of its own. If you don't know it, you'll slip before you even realize." Lila chuckled softly, but she still knelt down and pulled another rag from the cart. They wiped the floor together for a few quiet minutes. Then Martha spoke, her voice as soft as the hum of an air vent. "They laugh, you know. Not out of meanness. It's just easier to laugh when you don't understand. Easier to dismiss what you've never had to see behind an old mop handle." Lila, still scrubbing the stain, looked up and asked gently, "Did you used to do something else?" Martha smiled faintly. "You think I was born with this mop in my hand?" She didn't answer right away, just added, "You live long enough, you learn. Not everyone walks a straight line. Some of us have to circle to fall before we get where we're meant to be." That was the end of the conversation. Short, simple. But to Lila, it felt like a piece of a map had landed in her hands, leading to something deeper that everyone else in this building had simply overlooked. The next day, Lila started paying attention. She noticed Martha was the one who turned on all the meeting room lights every morning, the one who spotted when the server room door wasn't locked properly, the one who quietly fixed a loose power strip near the engineering station. No one noticed, no one knew. But Martha, she kept the whole machine from falling apart in the small, invisible ways. And the more Lila watched, the more she realized Martha wasn't just cleaning up. She was the quiet foundation, and somewhere inside her, something began to take root. Not suspicion exactly, more like instinct. Like when you see a painting hanging slightly crooked, not enough to call attention, but just enough to know something's off. Lila didn't know what to make of it yet, but she felt it, clear as day. Martha, the woman who quietly pushed a mop cart every day, might have once been something entirely different. She didn't know what. But from that day on, she started paying attention, not out of curiosity, but out of respect. A week later, while everyone was scrambling to prepare for the company's big product launch event, with its flashing LED screens, upbeat music, and a sea of balloons, Lila chose to spend her lunch break sitting next to Martha's mop cart. "You're not into all this big event stuff?" Lila asked, eyes still fixed on the half-built stage. "Oh, I like it," Martha replied, smiling with a crinkle at the corner of her eyes. "Especially the desserts, but you know," she added with a chuckle, "the more balloons there are, the easier it is to forget the ceiling's leaking." Lila laughed, but something in the weight behind the words pulled her in. She asked quietly, "Where did you used to work before this?" Martha paused for a moment, then answered in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. "Lots of places. Too many to list. Some I stayed for 3 months, some for 13 years. Some places I cleaned, some I ran. But every one of them taught me this. People always remember the CEO's name, but they never remember who kept the restroom clean." Lila froze for a moment. That line, it sounded like a quiet nod to a past that wasn't exactly ordinary. "You mean you used to run a company or something?" she asked, half joking, half curious. Martha just shrugged. "I used to run a kitchen with 3 kids, 1 mean dog, and a husband who always burned the fried eggs, so I guess that counts as a small business." Lila laughed, but in Martha's eyes there was something deeper. Neither sad nor proud, just the calm of someone who knew she was saying far less than she really could. After that day, Lila started digging. She asked someone in HR. They only knew Martha had come in through a temp agency nearly 2 years ago. No standout records. Nothing unusual. So Lila tried searching Martha Reynolds on some dusty old startup forums, places barely anyone browsed anymore. And strangely enough, she found something. A short interview from 12 years ago, buried in a barely read article. Martha J. Reynolds, former co-founder of a tech company called Lark & Finch, a startup that once made VentureSpark's top 50 most innovative list. Lila just stared at the screen. That name, that company, was the very one whose hallways Martha now swept, whose glass doors she now cleaned. And not one person in the entire building had the faintest clue. Lark & Finch was no longer the scrappy creative nest it once had been. Under the new CEO, Grant Voss, everything had been coated in a fresh, glossy finish. But if you looked closely, that paint was thin enough to peel with just a fingernail. Voss was the kind of man you could picture without ever meeting. Slicked back hair, crisp shirt without a single crease, and a voice that carried like he was pitching to a room full of investors. He didn't walk, he strode. He didn't chat. He communicated. And whenever he laughed, the whole office knew it was a signal. Either someone was about to get promoted or someone was about to be shown the door. The culture under Voss felt like a meeting that never adjourned. Employees were encouraged to give their all, which really meant working through weekends with a cold pizza and a thank you email praising their sacrifice. Leaving on time earned you side eyes, and those who stayed quiet were usually the smartest, because they knew speaking up wouldn't change anything. Worse, it might get them labeled as not a team player. Every Monday morning, Mr. Voss held his infamous Ignite session, a meeting where he'd deliver grand speeches about vision, velocity, and startup spirit, while department heads tried their best not to yawn. Behind the slogans like Think Big and Push Beyond were employees exhausted from juggling 3 roles for the pay of 1. Lila started noticing these things more clearly after learning about Martha's past. It was like someone had wiped the dust off a window. The contrast between the polished surface and the truth beneath was suddenly sharp. She remembered one time during one of those Ignite sessions when Martha had been quietly mopping the hallway nearby. Mr. Voss had walked by without so much as a glance, laughing loudly with his assistant as he said, "We really need to tighten up recruitment. This place is starting to look messy." Lila had flushed with secondhand anger, but Martha had only shaken her head gently, like someone who'd heard that kind of comment 100 times and survived every one. "You know," Martha had once whispered, "companies are like trees. If the roots are rotten, no amount of leaf painting will save you come fall." Lila wrote that down in her notebook, because she knew if a company couldn't recognize its own founder beneath a janitor's uniform, the problem wasn't Martha. It was in how the company defined worth. And quietly, inside her, a small plan was starting to take shape. That afternoon, the hallway on the 15th floor was as quiet as ever. Everyone was buried in quarterly reports, budget meetings, or doing the math to see if surviving on instant noodles for another month might help cover rent. Martha was cleaning the glass door outside the main conference room. Her little cleaning cart was always neat. One compartment for cloths, one for spray bottles, and one secret drawer where she kept butter cookies she liked to share with the night's security guard. No one noticed her there because people rarely looked down. They were used to looking up at deadlines, up at KPIs, up at numbers that seemed to move on their own. Two senior managers had just left a meeting and stepped into the hallway, holding expensive coffees and laughing, the kind of laughter that rarely came from anything kind. "You hear about that kid in marketing? Got cut," said the man with the salt and pepper hair, raising his eyebrows with a smirk. "Yeah, this company's like a bullet train. Can't keep up, you get thrown off. They're throwing faster these days." The other one chuckled darkly. "Exactly. These fresh grads think an MBA is going to save them. Around here, you survive by stepping over someone else." The two of them burst out laughing like they'd just told a hilarious joke. A real joke. One someone else might cry hearing. Martha stood still, her hand clenched around the cleaning cloth. A cup from her cart tipped, fell, and shattered on the floor. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through the air, sharp as a warning. The two men turned to look, a quick glance, then laughed again. "Oh, come on, lady. Can't even keep a cup upright anymore?" One of them sneered. No apology, no concern. Not even a moment of truly seeing her as a person. They turned and walked away. And right then, Martha knew she was done staying silent. She'd always believed she was strong enough to endure anything. But she hadn't realized that what would finally break her wasn't the struggle. It was the cold indifference of the very people she had once helped build careers for. She knelt down and picked up the shards of glass, one piece at a time, gently, slowly. But in her eyes, something had shifted. No more quiet resignation, no more shrinking into corners. The broken glass was just a trigger. What really cracked was her belief that silence could somehow keep things intact. The last drop had fallen, and Martha, the woman who once co-founded this very company, knew it was time to rise, dust herself off, and take the floor back. There was one thing no one in the building considered. For someone like Martha to accept the role of janitor, there must have been deeper pain behind her pride. Many years ago, she co-founded the company with her husband, Walter Ellis, a brilliant engineer with a visionary mind. Together, they built the foundation from scratch, starting with nothing but an old garage in the suburbs of New Jersey. But after Walter passed away from a sudden illness, Martha, then in her 50s, was forced to sign a resignation letter citing lack of executive capability in the modern era. Behind the decision was Voss, at the time the young, ambitious CFO with a silver tongue. She quietly stepped away. No lawsuits, no fights. Partly because she was weary, but also because she still believed the company would hold on to the values she and her husband had built. But then she saw the news about the mass layoffs, the lawsuits from former employees, and the allegations that were swept under the rug. And finally, in a moment of impulsiveness, or perhaps awakening, she applied to work as a janitor in the very same building. No one recognized her. Time and the gray uniform had erased all traces. In the beginning, she only observed, but the longer she stayed, the more she realized everything was rotting from the inside out. The late-night meetings reeking of alcohol, the cruel orders coming from the mouths of people who were once just interns, the employees who left in silence, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. She started taking notes, quietly, consistently. Then she asked HR for an additional job, cleaning the executive meeting rooms and waiting areas, claiming she wanted to increase her working hours. There, she placed a small camera pen in the corner of a filing cabinet where informal conversations often took place. She also hid a small microphone in the mop handle, an object no one ever paid attention to. Every inappropriate joke, every unnecessary layoff plan, every directive forcing employees to take unpaid leave, she collected it all over the course of nearly 3 months. Each evening, she would return to her small apartment, transfer the data to a hard drive, and record everything in a moss-green notebook with a worn-out cover. No one knew that the words they spoke in moments of carelessness would become the evidence that would force them to bow their heads. And Martha didn't need to raise her voice, because sometimes the truth is powerful enough to speak for itself. Thursday morning, a light rain fell, as if the heavens themselves knew something significant was about to happen. On the 24th floor, the main shareholders' meeting room, the black leather chairs were polished to a shine, the water bottles neatly arranged, and the projector screen already displayed the company logo. This year's shareholder meeting seemed like it would be just another formality, as it had been in previous years. But this time, one unexpected name appeared on the presentation list: Martha Ellis. Voss raised an eyebrow. "Who is she?" he asked, though his voice faltered slightly. No one answered. But then the door to the room swung open, and Martha walked in, no longer in her janitor's uniform, but in an old but crisp charcoal gray suit. Walking beside her was Lila, carrying a laptop and a thick stack of documents. A brief murmur spread across the room. Some people recognized her, others looked confused. But no one could stop her as she placed her hand on the table, powered on the projector, and spoke. "Hello, everyone. I am Martha Ellis, one of the two founders of this company. And today I am here to show you what is truly happening behind these walls." The room fell silent, so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then, one by one, the recordings played. Mocking laughter about firing employees like changing light bulbs, the scolding of a manager with degrading words, plans to sidestep laws to cut benefits. Everyone's eyes turned to Voss, who was now pale but still trying to maintain his composure. "This is an invasion of privacy. These recordings, they're illegal." Martha said nothing, merely nodding slightly toward Lila. The young woman stood up, pulling out a thick stack of legal documents. All recordings were made in public spaces within the office, with no passwords or restricted signs. Additionally, we have confirmation from an independent legal advisor. And more importantly, the employees signed consent forms in the recent internal survey. Perhaps you didn't notice because you never read the reports. A murmur rippled through the room. Major shareholders began reviewing the documents. One person asked, "Miss Martha, do you have any proposals?" She smiled gently, neither bitter nor tense, as though she were simply pouring more tea into a cup. "I don't have any proposals. I just think a company like this deserves leadership that knows how to respect people." A short while later, the vote began. In just 17 minutes, CEO Voss was removed from his position with the majority vote in favor. Lila sat still. Her hands were still shaking, but inside her, something warm and unusual began to ignite. Martha turned to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've just done something that most people wouldn't even dare think about in a lifetime." After the shareholder meeting, Voss silently packed up his belongings. There was no farewell party, no bouquet, not even an email wishing him luck. He left the building like a shadow, someone who had once been at the top, now only leaving behind the sound of the office door closing for the last time. A week later, Voss's name disappeared from the company website. No one spoke of it aloud, but everyone breathed a sigh of relief, as though a heavy stone had been lifted off their chest. People began to look at each other differently, not out of fear, but with hope. The HR department received more internal feedback emails than ever before. Employees, both old and new, shared their stories of what they had endured: the cruel jabs, the unpaid overtime, and the times they felt they could be erased from the office with a single word from Voss. But the most surprising thing was that those who had once looked down on Martha were now the first to invite her to sit down at the coffee table. "Are you really one of the founders of the company?" a young employee asked, his voice hesitant. Martha just smiled, stirring her lemon tea. "Maybe, but that was a long time ago, back when you weren't even born." The way people looked at her had changed. No longer was it the pitying gaze of those who saw an old woman mopping the floor in the middle of the night. Instead, it was respect for someone who stood up, not for power, but for justice. The meeting room on the 24th floor was renamed the Ellis Room. A small, simple wooden plaque was placed on the door with the inscription, "Dedicated to those who dared to speak the truth at the most difficult time." Lila, once the newest employee, was now invited to serve as an advisor for the Internal Reform Council. She turned down the offer to be head of the department. "I'm not good enough yet," she said, but agreed to put her name on the company's new Listen to Employees program. And as for Voss, no one really knew where he went. There were rumors that he had started a small startup, this time about bottled coffee. Well, everyone has to start over sometime, right? Martha didn't talk much about him. She simply said, "People don't really lose when they're pushed out of a chair. They only lose when they think that chair defines their worth." She still came to the company, but no longer to mop the floors. Now, she tended to the small garden behind the building. She asked to plant a few white chrysanthemums and a row of lavender. People asked, "Why don't you plant something more eye-catching?" She smiled softly, because those flowers don't compete to bloom. They quietly do their work, just like many people here. One Friday afternoon, the rain drizzled steadily. Martha sat in the corner of the company's backyard, holding an old book in her hands, a steaming cup of mint tea beside her. The garden she had once requested to plant a few white chrysanthemums in was now lush and green, with rows of delicate lavender flowers mixed in. No one would have guessed that what had once been a forgotten parking lot had now become a favorite space for many employees. Lila stopped by, carrying a bag of homemade cookies. The young woman sat down, handed one to Martha, and softly said, "I've applied for the internal leadership program. I think it's time for me to take the next step." Martha smiled, nodding slowly. "You don't need to climb too high to make an impact. Just stand firm, like a tree that knows the wind will come but still chooses to bloom." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the sound of rain pattering on the porch. Then, a group of young employees walked by, waving at Martha as if greeting an old friend. One of the young men blurted out, "Miss Ellis, you're famous now. There's an article about you, the janitor who cleaned the company's history with kindness." Martha chuckled, a deep yet crisp laugh. "Oh, I think I only cleaned the floors, not the history." The young man blushed, but the whole group burst into laughter. The sound of their laughter mingled with the scent of chrysanthemums, gentle yet comforting. The following month, the company held a day called Celebrating the Quiet Ones. There was no grand stage, no flashy banners. It was simply a shared lunch where employees from the logistics, security, reception, and even janitorial staff were invited to sit alongside the directors and executives. There were no rows of seats separating the ranks. Everyone was the same, shoulder to shoulder, enjoying a good meal, sharing a few kind stories, and beginning to learn how to live more kindly every day. As for Martha, she still walked to the small garden every morning, carrying pruning shears and an old radio. She still greeted the security guards by name, chatted with the receptionist in her halting Spanish, and never forgot to bring Lila a few oatmeal cookies every Tuesday. Because, as she always said, big changes always start with small things. And small things, when done with all your heart, are never small. And so the story ended not with a loud revolution, but with quiet smiles, flowers blooming after the rain, and a gentle heart that had changed an entire small world forever.
My dear, I know there are days when you feel too small, as if the whole world is running ahead while you're just cleaning the floors. You try to be kind, quietly do your part, but no one notices. No one acknowledges you. And worse, sometimes they even laugh at you, look down on you. But my dear, do you know something? Kindness is not weakness. Endurance is not incompetence. And silence doesn't mean ignorance. There are people, like Martha Ellis in the story I just told, who choose to live humbly, not because they lack the ability to stand at the top, but because they understand that true strength lies in choosing not to prove it to anyone. So, if today you find yourself bowing your head before someone who looks down on you, remember this. True value does not lie in the position you're in, but in the way you walk forward. Keep walking, doing what's right, kind, and quiet, like planting seeds into the earth. Then one day, those seeds will bloom, not to show off, but to soothe the barren land around you. I believe in you just as I believed in Martha Ellis. And I hope that one day, not too far from now, you will believe in yourself, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. With all my love, Miss Ellie.